I have a bee on my shirt this time, so it's like supporting your game.
Perfect. I have Sailor Moon, so I mean, there's a moon in
Um,
Ori somewhere, right?
Moon Studios. Yes!
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 Boom, 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 boom.
Yes! Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about 2 soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Joe DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs as well as the games they come from without getting too bogged down in music theory. Up first for our 2 games this week is 2015's Ori and the Blind Forest, the journey of a light spirit to restore the life of the forest with the elements of water, wind, and warmth.
After that, it's a bleak and desolate adventure through a ruined kingdom populated by nail-wielding bugs. 2017's Hollow Knight.
Last week, we had the most difficult time trying to find a theme between Donkey Kong Country and Mass Effect 2. This week, it's probably the easiest theme, or at least one of the easiest themes we've ever had.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably up there. It's pretty trivial.
So these are 2 of the best, if not the best, independent games that are Metroidvanias ever made. Ever.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Even having barely played yours, I 100% would agree that that's probably the case.
So yeah, very similar games. They do have their differences, and we'll get to talk about them as well as the differences with their soundtracks. Both are amazing, as you might expect for us to talk about them on this show. But Joe, this is the first show that we're recording since you went to PAX East. Tell us all about it, within reason. I knew it could go forever.
Well, technically, it's not over yet because I still have to write so many things. But yes, I went to PAX East. I got to go as media, so I got to skip all of the lines. Just some highlights. The Animal Crossing line was never like a 3-hour wait, ever. All 3 of them. There were 3 lines. One to play the game, which I don't really get why anybody would have lined up to play that game. I am looking forward to Animal Crossing, but guys, it comes out in 2 weeks.
Yeah, pretty much.
Like, it comes out in 2 weeks. You could be playing so much more at PAX. There was one just for a photo op thing, where they had like mascots out there of like Isabelle and Tom Nook, and they had like a little setup. It was really nice, but there was always like an hour-long wait for that too. And then they had the merch line, which only became short when all of the Animal Crossing merch sold out. So that was fun. There was the Square Enix booth, which I never got to go into, the Final Fantasy VII Remake one, which people stood in that line for 2 hours, and then the day after PAX East ended, the demo got put online.
It's a great demo, but I'm sure people felt a little foolish.
I would have been absolutely furious had I waited in that line. Some standouts of the games that I played. I got to try out Nirvana, which is the sequel to Valhalla, which we have talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
From the same publisher, I got to play a game called World of Horror, which is a point-and-click adventure game taking a lot of cues from Junji Ito and H.P. Lovecraft and stuff like that. That was really interesting. And 2 last things that I definitely want to mention. 3 last things that I definitely want to mention real quick. I haven't played the game yet, but we did an appointment for a game called Wonderling, and the reason I bring it up specifically for this show is because the developer gave me the weirdest piece of swag I got the whole weekend, which is the game's soundtrack on a cassette tape.
Nice.
I will never hear what is on this cassette tape because I haven't seen a tape player in a decade, but that was an interesting way to give me that, I suppose. So big ups to that.
Well, you know, boomboxes are coming back as this like retro thing that the kiddies never experienced, right?
I didn't know that actually, but I totally believe you. It's just like vinyl's coming back. Speaking of, almost bought like 3 different vinyls, including Florence, which was on sale at Annapurna's booth. Though I did end up buying Sayonara Wild Hearts tarot cards, which look really nice and cool.
Yes.
The second thing is I got to go to the Supergiant concert.
Oh, yeah.
Where Ashley Barrett and Darren Korb got to perform next to the Supergiant Orchestra, which was being conducted by Austin Wintory. It was a fantastic concert. I got a poster. Did end up getting it signed by Logan Cunningham, Darren Korb, and Ashley Barrett. Unfortunately, I could have gotten it signed by Austin Wintory. I walked by him right after I got it signed by the other 3.
Oh.
But he was sitting on the floor talking to from what I could tell, he was talking to some people that wanted to get into game composition. I think based on what he was saying, he was giving advice to people that want to get into the industry, and I wasn't going to interrupt that. And then I didn't see him again the whole weekend. But I did get it signed by the other 3. So, maybe one day I'll bump into Austin Wintory again. He can sign a piece of tape and I'll put it on the poster. And the last thing is I got to interview Hideki Kamiya and Atsushi Inaba about the Wonderful 101 Remastered. And that was a really cool experience that I've never had anything like before. It was one thing interviewing Darren Korb and David Housden. It was another thing being in the room with somebody that has made like AAA games that you have played and needing a translator and everything. It was very interesting and cool. And that was basically PAX in a nutshell. If you want to hear more about it, ask me on Twitter.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Games that we've even talked about the last few weeks with Hideki Kamiya. So that's amazing. Let's roll right into the composer follow-up news that's happened. We've talked about so many composers in the past episodes of this show. So we'll follow up on how they're doing and other game, music, news tidbits of note, like the BAFTA nominations are now out. I think first week of April is when the awards show happens. But notable nominations for Best Music, there's Control, Death Stranding, Disco Elysium, Outer Wilds, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, and Watam. For Audio Achievement, Ape Out, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Control, Death Stranding, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, and Untitled Goose Game. And if you're curious, the Best Game nominees, Control, Disco Elysium, Luigi's Mansion 3, Outer Wilds, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, and Untitled Goose Game.
Kind of surprising to see Luigi's Mansion 3 up there, but hey, it was a pretty good game, so I'll take it.
Yeah, some Switch representation there.
For another piece of news, After Party, which is Night School's second game, launched on Switch on Friday, March 6th. That was last Friday from time of release, yesterday from time of recording. With music by Andrew Rohrman, aka Scientific. I did the review on it for Nintendo World Report. It still, unfortunately, kind of runs not great, because it had some performance issues on PS4 as well. But if you can get past that, the writing is fantastic and the soundtrack is fun, and I definitely recommend giving it a shot.
Yeah, this is the game coming about 5 months later than the other versions, but good to finally see it on Switch. A game that's now out on Switch and PC is Murder by Numbers, and this is best described as the sort of aesthetics of Ace Attorney, with murder mysteries and whatnot, and the character designs, but with the gameplay of Picross. So I bought this game. I'm really interested to try it. It'll probably be the next game I play, actually. But of note, the music is by Masakazu Sugimori, who did the music for the original Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, who we talked about on this show.
I am very much looking forward to giving this game a shot. I also have not, I haven't bought it yet. I plan on buying it hopefully soon, but I spent a lot of money at PAX. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I've heard great things. Gonna be interesting. In news of a game soundtrack being released in an official capacity, the Link's Awakening Switch and Game Boy soundtracks are releasing in a special bundle on March 18th. It is a really nice looking package with like decorations on it and everything. And if I felt like I had the disposable income, I'd definitely be buying it.
I think you can get that through Play Asia if you are interested. we talked about The Wonderful 101 with your interview with Kamiya and Inaba. The Wonderful 101 Remastered completed its Kickstarter and announced that they will be launching for PS4 and Switch on May 19th in North America, May 22nd in Europe, and June 11th in Japan. I think there's probably also a PC release as well in there. So the 3 platforms overall through Steam. Their Kickstarter, a wild success with an original goal of 5.4 million yen, ended up with 235 million yen. So it was like the equivalent of like $51,000 US, and they passed like 2.25 million. Just amazing with the help of 33,199 backers.
Which is more copies than the game sold.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's kind of sad but true. Well, thanks Wii U. But one of the nicest things was as part of like the stretch goals and whatnot, they got to announce that the game will be getting remixed tracks by Yuzo Koshiro, Keiichi Okabe, and Yoko Shimomura. Like 3 composers that we have already covered on this show, and that's a good feeling to see those 3 picked, and like, yep, they're big in the Japanese music industry right now for video games.
Also, we got a look into Doom Eternal's soundtrack being done by Mick Gordon, and some heavy metal choir in there. Not to mention, just the internet is great right now because of all of the Animal Crossing and Doom memes. And so, just what an unlikely pairing that has gone incredibly. God bless it.
They have paired so well, absolutely. Yeah, he's working with like 20 metal vocalists, and it's like split with male and female. Sounds great for the little bit that they were teasing and showing. And Mick Gordon is always just the coolest to hear talk about his work. And finally, we've talked about The Last of Us on the show. It was announced this past week that an HBO series has been greenlit. It's in pre-production for The Last of Us, written and produced by Chernobyl's Craig Mazin, and also the original Last of Us game director and writer, Neil Druckmann. So what a pairing. They haven't announced casting yet for Joel and Ellie, but that sounds amazing, and hopefully Gustavo Santaolalla would be roped in for the soundtrack as well. I think that's like the perfect pairing, and I'm really, really excited about that.
I am also, kind of excited. I don't have HBO, so I probably would not be able to watch it until it hit like Amazon. I think Amazon Prime gets some HBO stuff, but like I think HBO is a good place for that kind of TV series to go, honestly. And I hope it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's finally get started with talking about our first game this week. And I am talking about Ori and the Blind Forest, which is a video game that released for Xbox One and PC on May 11th, 2015. A definitive edition of the game launched a year later on Xbox One, with the PC version on April 27th, 2016. This contained new areas, mechanics, artwork, difficulty levels, and the ability to fast travel to different key areas on the world map. Ori and the Blind Forest Definitive Edition also launched on Nintendo's Switch on September 27th, 2019. And if you're wondering how to currently play it, I recommend it certainly on Switch, but it also is available in the Xbox Game Pass library, if you are a subscriber there. The game is developed by Moon Studios, and it is published by Microsoft Studios. Ori and the Blind Forest is a 2D side-scrolling platform adventure game. So we have talked about the Metroidvania genre of games before, where you have a world map and you start rather powerless, but your goal is to explore the world and collect power-ups and learn new abilities so that you can explore more and more of the world to accomplish your ultimate end goal. It's more about the exploration, while you do have also combat elements with a populated world of enemies. That's like the gist, and we've talked about Castlevania Symphony of the Night. We talked about Super Metroid. We've talked about these games and the ones that have inspired the genre before. But it's important to know that we're talking about 2 more games like this week, and they are more independent efforts that are top-notch, just almost masterclass here. So Ori and the Blind Forest certainly is one of these kinds of games, because Ori, as this little light spirit, starts as a weak creature, but finds strength in the spirit named Sign. That's Sein, almost like a German pronunciation in a way. Sign can shoot spirit flames to attack from a distance. When you're close to an enemy, the enemy will highlight red, and that'll let you know that you can fire these spirit flames, which will home on and attack this enemy at a pretty rapid pace. Now, after you gain experience from defeating enemies and finding different experience troves throughout the world, a skill tree can be filled out. There are also life and spirit upgrades that can be found, so to basically grow your health and your magic power, essentially. And over time, Ori will learn important abilities such as wall jumping, a double jump, a slow parachuting descent technique, among others. One of the interesting things about this game is that you can create soul links, which are these essentially save points, because there are a couple, designated save points that will fully heal you throughout the world, and they are few and far between. So you have to essentially create your own save points whenever it's safe to respond. You can't, be in the middle of some battle with enemies and save point. You can't do that. It's got to be safe. But that's essentially the game's checkpoint system in a way. It's really interesting. You can create a sense of challenge for yourself, or you can be really diligent in keeping these save points regular.
Yeah, honestly, I really like the sound of that. We'll get to this in a second, but I don't think I made it far enough to see that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I like that a lot.
It is pretty neat. And by the end of the game, when you create these soul links, you can gain some health back based on if you have the ability and the skill tree to do so. So especially when it's getting really difficult, it's really a matter of managing how frequently you're doing this. You don't want to decrease your spirit, your magic so much, but sometimes you have to, in the sense of, I need some more health. It's a good push and pull balance. The plot of Ori and the Blind Forest is that in the forest of Nibel, the small white forest spirit named Ori falls from the great and mighty spirit tree as a newborn during a great storm, and Ori is raised by the large black creature named Naru. However, when the giant shadowy owl Kuro steals the life force from the spirit tree, the forest is dying, and Ori is left all alone. Ori then discovers the small blue spirit orb named Sign, who is the remaining light and eyes of the spirit tree. And together, Ori and Sign must recover the light of the three main elements that support the balance of Nibel. These are waters, winds, and warmth. Big questions being, can Ori and Sign make this elemental journey together? Who or what will they discover along the way? And why is Kuro so hostile to Ori and the light? Here's where I'll ask you, Joe, what are our experiences with Ori and the Blind Forest?
Very limited on my end. I think I played about an hour, a long time, like a couple of years ago on PC. I own it on Switch. I recently bought it a couple months ago, and I do plan on getting to it, but I just haven't had the time or a chance quite yet. I feel like playing it on Switch is going to be the best way to get me through it.
Yes.
In a quote-unquote timely manner.
Mm-hmm. I think that is very accurate. So, as of our recording time, I rolled credits on this game an hour ago. After playing it for, well, I shouldn't say the very first time. After playing it for the second time. See, a little more than a couple weeks ago, I started playing Ori and the Blind Forest for the first time after owning the game for a few years now on Xbox One. And I'm like, you know what? This is coming up. It's a soundtrack I don't know well. I probably should play the game. It's short enough. It's like 6 to 9 hours, depending on how proficient you are at these games. So, yeah, I should play it. I should get to know what this game is all about. And Xbox Live was having some service issues that evening when I was playing. So when profiles were being logged in, logged out, I didn't think too much of it. I was really enjoying my time with it. Put in about 2 hours, 15 minutes, 2 hours, 30 minutes with it. All right. Save, do all that. Close the game, leave. Come back the next night to continue. My save file's at 15 minutes.
Yeah, I got a message about that right afterwards, too.
It's so disheartening when you lose that kind of progress, especially at the beginning of the game. So I took a couple weeks, but as we get closer to recording this, I'm like, I really liked what I played. I got to get back to it. And so I started last night at 9 p.m. and I finished today, the next day, at 6:30 p.m. So, yeah, I really, really enjoyed the game. I had a great time with it. I played about 7 hours, 30 minutes. I had about 84% completion. It's a great adventure. I have quite a bit to say about it here while talking about this game, but I think that's a first for me where I'm like, I just finished my first ever experience with this game right before I'm here about to talk about it. So I think that's really, really exciting.
Yeah, I don't think I've done that yet. The closest I've done is I replayed Florence before we did that episode. But that game's 45 minutes long, and that was my third time going through it. So it's not quite the same. So yeah, congratulations.
Thank you. It was, certainly playing on easy to get through it. I don't need the difficulty, all that, but I had a great time. Moon Studios, the developers behind Ori and the Blind Forest. This isn't a team of people located in one location working closely together. They are staffers strewn about throughout the world. People in places like Austria and Australia and Israel and the United States and England, just all over the place. Development of the game took 4 years, and Microsoft acquired the game's publishing rights about a year into development. So the game's story is inspired by movies like The Lion King and The Iron Giant, but I think you can see distinct design influence, whether it's with the characters or the world, from Hayao Miyazaki films. So Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind. There's literally a section of the game called Valley of the Wind. I think that's pretty on the nose there. The big character Naru almost looks like a Totoro from My Neighbor Totoro.
A little bit.
And Princess Mononoke, that's all about the spirit of the forest and the health of the forest. I mean, that's also pretty on the nose there. But if you had to talk about the actual gameplay of Ori and the Blind Forest, the platforming involved is Rayman to a T. And when I'm talking Rayman, I mean Rayman Origins, Rayman Legends, the recent Rayman platforming games. If you know how that feels, Ori controls very similarly. But of course, the Metroid franchise with it's the Metroidvania design. Of course, the world is set up very much like that. So I feel like those two franchises are an easy combination to explain the gameplay feel and the elements therein. The earliest game footage that I saw, whether it was behind the scenes things on YouTube, or there was some features on the definitive edition even. There were some interesting differences. You're seeing the bare bones of the game where Ori starts as just a rectangle. It's very polygonal just to try to get the physics and the feel down before fleshing it out with character and world designs and all of this. But the project was apparently originally called Sign after the character, so Sein. And there looked like there was a feature called Chanting, which looked and acted very similar to the playing and use of songs from The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. There were also abilities for Ori to roll into a ball, whether that was to accelerate down slants or fit into tight spaces, almost like a morph ball sort of thing from Metroid, but this didn't make it into the final game. Also, the original model for Ori looked more humanoid and honestly weirder. The kind of cat creature-like design they ended up with is perfect. But this early one, not so much. And the character even had in-game text dialogue, which Ori is silent in the game. So the whole world of Ori and the Blind Forest loads in and takes place on one large map, rendered at 1080p 60, with no visible loading time as the player explores the world. It's a great, seamless, flawless experience on that front. According to the game director Thomas Mahler, the game's backgrounds even are all individual components, individually designed for that world. There's no reusing of assets, and they're not taken and then placed in other parts of the world. Ori and the Blind Forest was first revealed at E3 2014, and this was the first place and time that the members of Moon Studios got to meet face to face.
I love stories like that, because that happens more and more nowadays, where it's like, oh yeah, we made this game together, we've never met in person.
Yes, especially with indie efforts, absolutely. Shortly after that E3, it was announced through the game's website that an Xbox 360 version of the game was also planned for early 2015. Now let's keep this in mind. E3 2014... this is the E3 following the launch of the Xbox One. So I guess, yeah, it would make sense if Xbox 360 would still have a group of players that were still playing games at a certain point, and then you go into March of 2015 when the game launches. But this never happened. And to the point where, there was no official announcement of a cancellation or a delay or anything like that for an Xbox 360 version of Ori and the Blind Forest. It was just never talked about again.
Mighty Number 9 still coming to 3DS.
Someday. And then, less than a year later, after the game's launch, that was when the definitive edition was announced at Gamescom 2015. The game has some Easter eggs, one of which being the fact that the Wilhelm scream exists in this game. If you do not know what the Wilhelm scream is, it is the classic scream sound effect. Frequently, I think, in George Lucas films, it's heard commonly in Star Wars, Indiana Jones, when someone's falling and it's the kind of sound. And so this can be triggered by bashing a green spitter enemy off of a ledge in the Valley of the Wind section. So a very specific set of circumstances to trigger this, but apparently it does occur. The game was reviewed very well, with a Metacritic average of 88 on Xbox One and PC, and 89 on Switch. That doesn't always happen, that a later report or release gets just as high, if not higher, as far as Metacritic scores.
Well, that's something that both of our games have in common.
Very interesting. I think it just shows the quality of their game experience. It was explained by one reviewer in that, quote, "It succeeds in being both a great introduction to the genre and a rewarding experience for the hardcore audience." There were very few complaints generally, one of them being that combat overall is not that tight of an experience. I can kind of agree with that. Ori can't shield or dodge or roll dodge, so you kind of have to, in a way, jump out of the way. I kind of wish there were some more defensive options, but at the same time, your offensive options are so overpowering that it's that glass cannon almost strategy in a way. And depending on your difficulty, enemies can deal out big time damage, but you can too. Also, there are some difficulty spikes and maybe some decreased conveyance during some of the game's escape sequences. It can be a little frenetic, and at that kind of pace, it may be difficult to tell where exactly you need to go. The game won several awards for its art direction and its animation. It was very tough to compete in the indie game scene in 2015 with releases like Undertale and Rocket League. Some pretty notable indie games there. But the score, the music, it was nominated at the Game Awards, lost to Metal Gear Solid 5, and also at the BAFTAs, which then lost to Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, but it won Best Score at the DICE Awards. The legacy of the game, Ori is a playable fighter in the indie platform fighter Rivals of Aether, and we are talking about Ori and the Blind Forest specifically today because its sequel, Ori and the Will of the Wisps, was announced at E3 2017 and is out tomorrow, March 11th, 2020, 5 years to the day from Ori and the Blind Forest's release, which is interesting because it was originally supposed to be in February, got pushed back to land specifically on this 5-year anniversary date. So yes, tomorrow as of time of release of this episode on Xbox One and PC. It's also available on Xbox Game Pass. Of note for Ori and the Will of the Wisps, we talk about Metroidvanias and things like that, and there's the infamous AM2R project, another Metroid 2 remake game that was ceased and desisted by Nintendo, famously. The creator of that game, after that happened, ended up getting work at Moon Studios and worked on Will of the Wisps. So we're here to talk about the soundtrack to Ori and the Blind Forest, and what a soundtrack it is. Composed by Gareth Coker. Gareth Coker, born on May 7th, 1984 in the United Kingdom. He started playing piano with lessons at 8 years old, but he wasn't into it much. But then he got sent off to a boarding school, and there was lots of time on his hands, so he played some more, and the bug bit him, so he said. Really found that itch. He started composing at age 15 thanks to playing in school orchestras and, playing in some jazz bands and improvising a bit there. Some media inspirations that he noted for getting into composing were Alan Silvestri's main theme for Forrest Gump, as well as the Star Wars flight simulator games, X-Wing and TIE Fighter. He said he'd been playing games since 4. He liked playing games more than watching movies, so definitely gravitates to video games overall more as a media that he likes. So, at a teacher's recommendation, he applied to the Royal Academy of Music in London, but he didn't think his portfolio would give him too much of a shot, and yet he was selected. According to the professor who accepted him, quote, "Because you can write a tune. Everything else can be taught, but the hardest thing to teach is a feel for melody." He didn't stop his studies there, though. He also studied at the University of Southern California, and he's lived all over the world. In Hilversum, which is in Holland, or the Netherlands, Baltimore, Maryland, Utsunomiya, Japan, and Los Angeles in California. Specifically, he moved from Japan to LA in 2009. His website quotes that he has a compositional style focusing on memorable, melodically driven themes and motifs, combined with unique and unconventional soundscapes. Of note in particular, I found this very interesting because I remember watching this E3 press conference, and they hardly gave this any credit, I remember, if at all. During E3 2017, at the Microsoft press conference, the reveal trailer for Ori and the Will of the Wisps, there was a piano playing, and Gareth Coker was on stage playing that live and in time for the trailer. I don't remember this at all, but yet it was noted in multiple places that it was he was like nervous and it was a big pressure situation, but it was a really cool moment. It was like, how did the production of that press conference not note this at all?
I also don't remember that happening at all. And I kind of remember that conference.
But it's a great trailer. It's great music. And I'm not going to lie, after now beating Blind Forest, I'm really excited for Will of the Wisps. I'm going to play the heck out of that. I've heard it's 3 times bigger. Really leans into Metroidvania a little bit more. It should be amazing. And apparently it's going to be auto-saving, actually, though, instead of all these Soul Link systems, which can be good or bad, depending. Gareth Coker quotes, I think it's always interesting when you hear or read the composers kind of waxing poetic on what they think the importance of game music is. So he says, quote, "I believe game soundtracks are less about transmitting the moment to moment of what's happening on the screen, because the player's in control of that anyway and thus instinctively knows what's happening, and more about transmitting an overarching feeling that ebbs and flows in a subtle way. Which, yeah, I totally get that. You can follow Gareth Coker on Twitter at Gareth Coker. So what has he worked on in his discography? Obviously, Ori and the Blind Forest and Will of the Wisps. He's also worked on video games such as Ark Survival Evolved, Darksiders Genesis, Primal Carnage, and The Unspoken. He also composed music for Minecraft, specifically for the Greek and Chinese mythology expansions. He's also worked on some films, such as Emma's Chance, Resistance is Life, Labyrinth, not that one for what it's worth, and Dark Power. I haven't heard of any of these, but he does also work on films, short films, documentaries here and there. And he also writes numerous cues for advertisements and library music companies like EMI Production Music, Icon Trailer Music. Some of his advertising clients would then include Jaguar, Ultimate Fighting Championship, ITV, Nevada Energy, and more. Some soundtrack-specific notes for Ori and the Blind Forest. Thomas Mahler, the game director, heard a few of Coker's tracks on the website ModDB, which is a place where developers can make mods or add-ons for existing games for free.
I remember that. I used it for Zoo Tycoon.
Oh, interesting, huh? The team at Moon Studios were all just looped very tightly in the creative process very early on. Even Gareth Coker remembers when Ori was still just a rectangle, and they were seeing how fun the gameplay was when it looked like that. So the team had confidence that it could translate into a great final product. The music was recorded with an orchestra at Ocean Way Recording Studio in Nashville, Tennessee. And the scoring engineer on the game is Nick Spezia. And why do I mention this name? Because this individual is the first person I've ever seen in video game credits that shares my last name, the spelling of it and all. For what it's worth, different family pronunciations and different branches. So my family says it like it rhymes with Asia in Spezia. I'm just gonna guess that Spezia is the more common pronunciation. So I first saw Nick Spezia's name in the credits for The Unfinished Swan when I played that game and the credits rolled, and I'm like, it's Spezia, it's that last name. But his name popped up again here, and I figured this is a good place to mention him. And then looking at his credits, it's amazing what he's worked on. So he's worked on Death Stranding, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, The Outer Worlds, Erica, Days Gone, Apex Legends, and those are just games from 2019. If you want to talk about other games that we've talked about on this show, he's either a recording engineer or an assistant recording engineer for Marvel's Spider-Man, God of War from 2018, Until Dawn, The Last of Us, and like I said, The Unfinished Swan. So, shout out to Nick Spezia. I see you, man.
That's so many great games and great soundtracks. Wow.
It's kind of cool when you can pull something like that, and just for being a recording engineer in the studio, like that's awesome. Also, we mentioned Austin Wintory early in the episode. He has special thanks in the credits. I was watching credits roll, and I'm like, oh, Austin Wintory, there you go. So, shout outs there. So what does this sound like? It's basically this gorgeous orchestral sound. You get a lot of piano and strings, and you even get some different wind instruments here and there that I'll point out, but also some vocals. And it's just an eargasmic sound coming all together. Let's get into the 5 critical tracks here. We'll start with the first one, Ori, Lost in the Storm. This song plays during the powerful intro sequence, specifically during the Great Storm. And it's one of the very first songs you hear. in the whole game. It's just magical, and you get absorbed into this world so easily. Shouts out to Arely Brighton for the killer vocals to just enhance this sense of wonder. And she provides the voice for Sign, oddly enough. Which, if you want to make a comparison, Sign, when she talks, I suppose, even though it's a Navi-like character, but the talking is very much like Midna, if you want to make Legend of Zelda comparisons. So yeah, I think this is a perfect piece to start things off with. We could probably continue with the other songs that are in that heartbreaking opening sequence. There's one that sounds like almost like Concerning Hobbits from Lord of the Rings, where it's just like, oh, this is the sound of my childhood and like Disney movies and like Lord of the Rings and things like that. I almost put that on the list, to be honest, but I feel like to represent the beginning of the game, like this is the one here.
And I think I have vague memories of hearing this song because, like I said, I played the first hour. So I've seen the intro, and I know I've heard the vocal melody at the very least, for sure. It is a gorgeous piece. And you can even hear like some of the Ghibli influence just in this. This sounds very Princess Mononoke-ish in a way.
Okay. Yeah.
At least I think so. Maybe I'm nuts, but I can definitely hear a little bit of Hisaishi in here, though not a huge amount. But yeah, this is a gorgeous song. I love it.
But when you think like the sound of the forest, it's a pretty good representation. Number 2 on the Critical 5, First Steps into Sunken Glades. So yes, sad things happen. I apologize to my girlfriend. I'm also playing The Last of Us Remastered right now. And to have her watch those 2 game intros within the same week, I said, I promise this is like as sad as it gets for games as far as their opening sequences. Yeah, wow, back to back. That's a little rough. So yes, just a tragic intro, but Ori needs to pick themselves up, and so this is basically their first steps into the world. The Sunken Glades kind of like one of the first bigger areas that you start to explore, and you get this theme, and you're hit with this oboe. This oboe played by Nick Boyd. You don't often hear oboes in video game soundtracks, but they are very welcome when you do hear them. Basically, just a nice intro piece as you're learning the basics of the game. Like some of this piece is before you get to meet Sign, and some of them is after you do. So yeah, it's a really important piece. And when I was kind of cleaning up the map a little bit, collecting some power-ups I'd missed along the way, or I didn't have the abilities, but I'm coming back through this area. I was like, oh yeah, this piece definitely needs to belong here on the Critical 5, I think.
And yeah, I was about to say myself, like, oboes are kind of an underappreciated instrument, especially in video games. And just, they've got this nice, crisp sound to them, kind of, if that makes sense. Is that the word I'm looking for?
Yeah. I'm like, the reeds have like, a distinct sound that really cuts through.
Mm-hmm. And it is used very well in this song. And yeah, it's always nice to point out a sound that you don't hear. Like, it's why I point out banjos as often as I can, because you don't hear those very often either. I mean, banjos and oboes, not really that comparable, but, but I agree. I think even for that alone, this is a song that should be on this list.
Number 3 on the Critical 5. This is Restoring the Light, Facing the Dark. So this is my favorite song on the entire soundtrack, or at least this melody, this leitmotif. It just has such an energy to it. And so I feel like I have to explain like the 3 temples. So like the main quest like is broken up in these 3 parts, and you have to get keys to the temples, but then clear out the temple themselves. So then ultimately with the goal of like restoring the light in the temple. And you'd think, hey, you did that, you're free and in the clear, right? Well, it doesn't always go according to plan. So for the first temple, the water temple, essentially it takes place in this place called the Ginso tree. And you're climbing and you're climbing, you're climbing the Ginso tree. When you restore the light, water floods the tree. And you have to escape and climb even further as the water rushes to you. And this music plays during that. And it's so intense. And it kind of gives me the sense of like a Kingdom Hearts-like song.
100%. Absolutely.
It has a Shimomura feel to it. And yeah, I just really resonate with this so much. The piano coming in with the melody, like this main leitmotif that you're going to hear throughout the game of the da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. Like, oh, it's so good. I had to have this one here. It's my personal favorite.
I think I'd agree that so obviously the songs on your Critical 5 and Cutting Room Floor are essentially the only songs from the game I have ever heard, but I would agree that currently this is my favorite song in the game.
It's really good. Just has that intense energy, but like it's not a dark, evil sort of sound, but it's just like, no, you better move, Ori. Better get going. And even when you die, when you die and come back, like the music still continues. It doesn't like reset. So it's like, I'm okay with dying because I get to hear more of the song. It's pretty great in that way. Number 4 on the Critical 5. This is Completing the Circle. So you hear this piece after Ori gains one of the best abilities in the game, which is Charge Jump. And Charge Jump is like you hold down left trigger and then like when you're on the ground, and by pressing A, you launch yourself further up than you've been able to with a jump and a double jump or anything like that. It feels like almost like a rocket propulsion away. You get so much elevation. And if you're clinging onto a wall, you can like point to like an across the wall, or even like aim on like a 45 degree and like launch yourself that way. It's such a good ability. This is after the Wind Temple, so the second of the 3. And the contrast between just being broken emotionally from this game to like feeling accomplished and ready to take on the world. You have the piano going, you have the flute.
That flute is so good.
It's so freeing and so, it's not like carefree, but just it's so uplifting, and it's played by Rachel Mellis. And also then the strings like take their parts, and it's almost like the 3 elements are like all having their say, all while this percussion kind of drives the energy. I think it feels like flying, and that's almost, really representative of, because you're gaining all this elevation that you never had before. And it makes going back and cleaning up different things around the world so much easier.
Flying sounds like a good description of how this song sort of feels, and it's entirely the flute for me that gives that feeling. I'm trying to think of something that it reminds me of, but I'm not sure. It kind of reminds me of something almost that would be playing in a massage parlor while you're like, I've only gotten a massage a few times in my life, but usually they have these really like relaxing flute pieces playing in the background. And obviously this isn't what I would call relaxing, but it somehow at the same time has that same feel.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how else to describe it. It's very good.
There's just an airiness to it all.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the best way to put it. Last piece on the Critical 5. This is The Sacrifice. There is certainly much more to this piece. Big moments, big orchestra swells. But we're taking the ending here. And we're kind of showing how dim this can kind of go back down, but also there's a tinge of hope here at the end. This plays in the final scene of the game. It's another big moment right in the feels for players. So I think the end of this clip is just beautiful. It shows this nice simplicity, and yet there's power in the vocals, again, by Airily Brighton. There is so much more, though. And so I'm not necessarily going to spoil. I do recommend everyone goes and plays this game. But when you're talking about a piece called The Sacrifice, it's a pretty pivotal moment in the game, for especially the last cutscene. And so I was just struck by the simple beauty of the end of this one.
I don't have much context for it, obviously, having not played the game, but it is gorgeous. Yet more of those vocals. It sounds very good, and I can hear the emotion in your voice when you talk about it.
Yeah, it's a good one. I was almost so close to like not finishing this game just before, and I would have to be like, I'm just going to take people's words for it. People really talk about how this is a good one. No, the ending of the game is pretty good. It's pretty powerful. Okay. All right. I see you, game. I see you. Tracks on the cutting room floor. The first of them being Fleeing Kuro. Let's call this what it is. It's the final boss of the game. You go into the final temple. Might as well be the fire temple, the warmth temple. And the light of the temple gets out of control, and fire is everywhere, and the forest is burning down. Even more, you are trying to escape this shadowy owl figure that has been looming over you the entire game. And this owl, if you're out in the middle of nowhere for so long, he can kill you with one hit. So you're trying to escape this giant owl that you're completely underpowered and undermatched against. You're trying to do this platforming with this music playing that's so intense and really, really amps up the stress. But the forest is burning, and you're just trying to find that next bit of cover to hide behind, to reset that counter of how long Kuro can see you. It's a really intense, powerful piece. I love it. The second one, though, I feel like if there's one track to pick for the entire game, I feel like this is it, and I'll explain more why. This is Light of Nibel. Light of Nibel is the credits song. I would say it's like the one standout song on the soundtrack, but I couldn't put it in the Critical 5 because it's essentially a greater amplification of all of these different leitmotifs and themes that we've already played here in the Critical 5. So yeah, if you want the one piece that is like the summation of the whole soundtrack, if you just want to listen to one piece from from Ori and the Blind Forest, you listen to Light of Nibel. But I feel like the rest of the pieces on their own for the Critical 5 tell the story better, but this is like the better encapsulation. And so for the clip in particular, like please listen to the whole thing, but for the clip in particular, it's more of Arlie Brighton's vocals with the da 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 da, and she's providing this counter melody to it. It's so good. And right after this, then it goes into like an amped up version of the Restoring the Light Facing the Dark theme, the one that sounds like Kingdom Hearts with the rushing water. Like it sounds amazing, but yeah, it's a great credits piece. I really enjoy it.
I think this is probably my second favorite piece on the whole list. So it's very good.
And so I did have it on the Critical 5 at first, but then I started listening. It's like, we've already heard these themes before. So, but if we ever had to just say like, well, this is the one you got to hear for the whole game, I would say it is this one. So what will I never forget about the game? Just coming off of beating it for the first time ever. So I feel like I don't have the distance necessarily for Ori and the Blind Forest here. I'm coming off just amazed. Like throughout the whole game, I was just so impressed by the game and the level design, especially when you learn new abilities and just how well they teach you that. And you're using like everything by the end of the game. It may seem overwhelming, but it's like, oh yeah, I'm really, really digging this. I'm so excited for Will of the Wisps, honestly. But I remember hearing that like, oh, Ori is one of the biggest tearjerkers in the opening. And like, I knew what happened, so it didn't hit me as hard. But for someone else who watched, like my girlfriend, like that, that hit her pretty hard. That was impactful emotionally. And it's like, yeah, games can do that for sure. So yeah, it's up there among the tear-jerking opening sequences. And I think Ori would be a great name for a white cat. I'm just going to throw that out there.
You hear that, Herschel? Should have been a white cat. And I actually probably wouldn't have named you Ori because I haven't played the game yet, but it would have been a good name for you. Don't look at me like that.
So I have a theory, and maybe you can flesh it out a little bit more after you talk about your game, Hollow Knight. But I feel like with these two games, if someone's like, which one should I try first? I would say that Ori and the Blind Forest is great for those players who prefer Super Metroid, whereas Hollow Knight is more kind of catered towards those Castlevania Symphony of the Night players. I feel like the combat wasn't that big of an emphasis in this game. Like the bosses, like there's hardly anything to speak of. Like there's one boss, so to speak, that repeats in different ways, but it's not an intense showdown by any means. The biggest intensity is escaping the natural elements or a giant owl. And that's you running and hiding and trying to find the next hiding point. So if anything, Ori amplifies the exploration of the world more than combat. Whereas Hollow Knight, it's all about that Dark Souls-like difficult combat. The world is still great, of course. But for Super Metroid also, Samus has ranged combat. Well, Ori shoots out these spirit things. Well, Hollow Knight, you have your needle, like your sword there. So it's not only that, but also, I mean, these light, storybook, kind of catered to youth here for Ori, and then this like gothic theming for Hollow Knight. I feel like those are like some of the biggest like differentiators, I think. And so if you're wondering, again, we can expound this by the end maybe of your section, but if you're someone who really likes Super Metroid more than Castlevania Symphony of the Night, I'd say if you haven't played either of these yet, give Ori and the Blind Forest a shot.
So overall, I think I might agree with that theory, though Hollow Knight does definitely, as we'll get into, have a huge emphasis on exploration. Like massive, massive, massive. But it is definitely more combat focused than what it sounds like Ori is. So perhaps.
So to transition then to our next game, we like to highlight a fan cover, whether it's on YouTube, OC Remix, what have you. We're going to talk about a piece from Rush Garcia, who put together an Ori and the Blind Forest orchestration medley. And he calls it Wisps of Nibel. Please enjoy. We'll be right back.
It's time. It's time to talk about Hollow Knight. This is a plush I bought at PAX East of Hornet. Sorry, audio people, you miss out on this, but I like her. She's great. She's got a... You can take the needle off. It's great. Anyways, the real reason we are here is to talk about the game, Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight was originally released for PC on February 24th, 2017, and a Mac and Linux release would follow on April 11th, 2017. And then it would later be released on Nintendo Switch on June 12th, 2018, with a release on PS4 and Xbox One following on September 25th, 2018. Hollow Knight was developed by Team Cherry, a team of 3 people based out of South Australia. 3 people. Cannot stress enough how impressive that is. In Hollow Knight, the player takes control of a small bug warrior named simply the Knight, as he arrives in the small town of Dirtmouth. Dirtmouth exists above the ruins of a once great underground kingdom known as Hallownest, but for reasons not immediately clear, the kingdom has been abandoned and has fallen into shambles. So the Knight ventures into the ruined kingdom to find its former residents having lost their sanity, existing pretty much entirely on pure will and instinct, with no brain work to happen. The player must explore Hallownest, slowly learning about the kingdom's lore and the history and why it fell. But I don't want to give you too much information because that would spoil the game both for you and for me. So I can't. Because much like Souls, Hollow Knight starts you out with minimal information and lore, and you have to pick that up as you go. Just like Ori and the Blind Forest, Hollow Knight is also a Metroidvania. It is very focused on exploring a map and earning abilities as you go that gives you access to more parts of the map, etc., etc., upgrading your character to allow you to traverse easier or even traverse at all. And you can explore the map in any order that you really want, though obviously some areas you can't really get to unless you have the double jump or the wall jump or the air dash or stuff like that. So it's really built around that. Also, the map in Hollow Knight does not automatically update, and instead the player must first find the mapmaker Cornifer in the area they are currently exploring, and after purchasing the map from him, the map still doesn't automatically update. It updates when you sit down on a bench, which serves as the quote-unquote bonfires of this game. When you sit down at them, they set your spawn point and give you a full heal and all that. And also the map does not show your location unless you are wearing a charm that has it so that you're showing your location on the map. One of 2 qualms I have with this game is the lack of the map updating automatically. I'm fine with the charm. I do wish it was a toggle somewhere instead of taking up a charm space, but whatever, it's fine. It's fine. But I do wish the map updated automatically because I get lost easily and I'm dumb. The player can attack using a close range strike with the Knight's sword, which is actually a nail because he's a bug. And they can also gain the ability to cast spells for ranged attacks. The player can also equip charms that give a passive effect of some sort, such as providing more soul or money, lengthening the range of your nail, or causing an automatic counter whenever you take damage. I have that last one on because I get hit a lot, and I might as well take them with me. And speaking of taking damage, you probably heard the description I just gave and are thinking, Joe, you just said it could get you more soul? What the hell is soul? And I shall answer that question. In Hollow Knight, if you get hit by an enemy attack, you lose 1 health, which is represented by masks up at the top of the screen. And the only way to heal in Hollow Knight is to channel soul. Soul is gained every time you land an attack, and it fills up this orb-like icon up in the corner of the screen right next to your health with like a white sort of liquid. And when it starts glowing, that means that you have enough soul to heal 1 mask at least. And the way you do that is you try to find a safe spot, if there is one, hold down the A button, and the knight will sort of charge energy around him, and then after about a full second of doing this, you will get your health back. 1 mask back. It costs... You have to do that every time you want to heal a mask. And so it has this real huge focus on you gotta be smart about when you heal, because it leaves you completely open to attack. You cannot move while you are channeling soul. And it's a very interesting way of doing it, I think. NPCs can be found throughout Hallownest that can give you extra charm notches or power up your nail. And fast travel can be unlocked by discovering stag stations, which are basically... They're subways that existed in Hallownest, where giant stag beetles, giant ones, used to run through the tunnels and give people rides, and one is still alive, and whenever you unlock a stag station, he will run in and he can fast travel you to other stations around the world. And all of this costs the game's currency, which are little shell-like objects called Geo. So, unlike Ori and its pure Metroidvania inspirations, Hollow Knight actually has a bit of a second inspiration, at least seemingly it does, and that is Dark Souls. Hollow Knight's overall tone is very comparable to Souls, which is also about traversing through a ruined kingdom and learning lore as you go and having this melancholy sort of tone to it. But the most comparable part to Dark Souls is the use of the corpse run mechanic. When you die, you lose all of your Geo, and also your soul vessel will break, meaning that you can hold enough soul to heal 2 masks instead of 3, which is what you can do when the full thing is there. And the only way to get it back is to go back to the relative area where you died and fight your shade, which is just a ghost that looks like the knight that will try to attack you. They're not hard to kill. Hit them 3 times, you get all your money back, and your soul vessel is repaired. And with that sort of scatterbrained description of what Hollow Knight is, the TLDR, it's a Metroidvania, very close range, combat focused, a lot of bosses, etc., etc. What are our experiences with Hollow Knight? What are your experiences with Hollow Knight?
So, like you with Ori and the Blind Forest, I have also put in about an hour into this game. But I do not get on well with Dark Souls, and so I found a similar sort of struggle with Hollow Knight. Particularly, as you mentioned, with the map not filling in, and, those benches being your spawn points. Like, I'd make progress, pretty far progress, and then die. And then have to go all the way back, and then do the corpse run. And it's just I hit a point where it's just I was frustrated. They fell a long way down into Hallownest, and then trying to go out from there. And, yeah, I feel like it's a game I should try again. But it's just one where it's a mishmash of like one style of game I really like with another that I just don't get along well with.
And I can sort of see that. I think that Hollow Knight is one of those games where at the beginning it is very hard. In fact, on the Wikipedia article, somebody that we work with at NWR is quoted by name because NWR gave this game a 10 out of 10. And he mentioned that in his notes at the very beginning of the game, the words "too hard for me to ever recommend to anybody" were scribbled in there. And then he mentions that like eventually it just sort of clicked. And I think that's very similar to the experience that I have had so far, where after a certain, you pass like a point of no return where you're just like, oh no, I'm really, really into this game now, and I want to keep playing. I want to keep playing right now. I haven't had time, but I genuinely do want to keep going. I haven't beaten it yet. I'm still currently working my way through it because, while I am explaining it as eventually it just sort of clicks, it's still quite difficult sometimes. The bosses will kick your ass if you give them the chance. A lot of this game has been just fantastic. I only really have two big criticisms of it, which is the map filling out thing. I really do think that's a bit much, making you buy the map and then also still not updating it as you go. I feel like you can have one or the other, and I feel like having both is just a little much. And the other being bosses do not have health bars, which I've noticed that I think I'm the only one that kind of has a problem with that, and it doesn't ruin anything, but I really, really do wish the bosses had health bars. But I'm enjoying it immensely currently, and learning about some of the development about this game has been super fun, and let me share some of that very interesting knowledge with you. So the original idea for Hollow Knight came from a Ludum Dare project in 2013. And if you don't know what Ludum Dare is, it's a specific game jam, and a very popular one at that. We have mentioned game jams before. In the past, I believe they came up during World of Goo. Usually, the point of a game jam is to give like a week or like 3 days or something that you have to make a game from scratch. Usually it's about a week or so. Ludum Dare specifically is 24 to 48 hours. You have to make a game from scratch. That's the challenge. The two people that would go on to found Team Cherry decided that they were going to take part in the Ludum Dare that year. And it was through these conditions that developers Ari Gibson and William Pellin created the game Hungry Knight. In Hungry Knight, you play as a character who is killing bugs in order to keep themselves from starving to death. This game currently holds a 1-star rating on Newgrounds. That was one of the most shocking things to discover, is that Hollow Knight, of all things, has its origins on a bad Newgrounds game. Baffling. Interesting. I love it. Later on, Gibson and Pellin decided to try their hand at another game jam. This one had the theme of Beneath the Surface, and while they failed to meet the deadline on this specific game jam, you can probably see where this is going. They kind of got thinking about both projects, and the gears started turning, and eventually this resulted in the concept of exploring a deep and old kingdom populated by insect characters was brought forth, and therefore the concept that would become Hollow Knight was born. And for them, the first step to create a good game this time, was to make sure that the player's movement felt the best it could be. And to accomplish this, the Knight's movement is actually based on Mega Man X, which we talked about a couple weeks ago. In fact, that was 2 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. For some reason, my brain was like, that was last week. But no. Time doesn't exist anymore. So they wanted to make sure that you have a consistent speed while moving on the ground. So the only momentum you have is just this consistent speed and all that. But also like having full control of yourself while in midair. And also that's where the ideas of like the wall jump and the air dash and all that came from as well. They wanted to make a game where players felt like they could have avoided that boss's attack right up until that attack actually landed and they took damage. And I think overall, they did a good job with that. All of the game's art was apparently done by Gibson, who scanned in his hand-drawn sketches directly into Stencil, which was the original engine that they were working with, but the game would eventually move development onto Unity for the final product.
I should note, I think I forgot to, ORI was also done on Unity, even though it looks a lot like a UbiArt kind of game. So, yeah, there's similarities there too.
Interesting. As expected, the world's complexity, like the map and how big and explorable it is completely based off of Metroid. I assume Super Metroid specifically. And they described it as, quote, allowing the player to become disoriented and lost, focusing on the enjoyment of finding one's way. Their goal with the map system was to find a balance between not telling the player everything, while also not being too unfriendly and cryptic. And again, I think they took it a little too far. But again, I'm not going to bring that up over and over again. I've mentioned it already. In order to fund development, a Kickstarter campaign was launched in November of 2014, asking for $35,000 Australian. And it proceeded to raise $57,000 Australian from a total of 2,158 backers. The backer rewards, as usual, included things like digital manuals, beta access, as well as creating a character to be put in the game. Some of them just characters that you can go talk to. Some of them characters that are actual boss fights.
Sounds a lot like Shovel Knight, actually.
Honestly, a lot like Shovel Knight. So using these extra funds, they were able to hire somebody to serve as technical director. That would be David Kazi, as well as the composer, who we shall get into shortly. Hollow Knight reached beta in 2015, and once it fully released in 2017, it received near universal praise. The Metacritic score for its PC release currently sits at an 87, but the Switch release currently sits at 90. Very few reviews that I could find seemed to go below a 9, and seemingly none of them went below an 8. And by June 11th, 2018, the game had sold over 1 million copies on PC, and then the very next day, the Switch version released, and within a week had sold over 250,000 copies. In total, as of February 2019, Hollow Knight has sold over 2,800,000 copies. But fun fact, the Switch version was actually planned to be a Wii U version. And for obvious reasons, it was moved to the Switch, being that the Wii U was dead as a doornail in 2016. Matt described to me our friend Neil, one of the owners of Nintendo World Report, talks about 2016 in hushed tones, is the way that he told me that. So obviously development got moved onto a Switch version. And it was actually the first version that was put into development alongside the PC version. So they planned from the beginning to make sure that this was on a Nintendo platform. And Team Cherry seems to have a pretty good relationship with Nintendo. Silksong was part of their show floor at E3. So that's really cool. So originally, the Switch version was actually planned to release pretty close to the Switch's launch, but it got delayed to early 2018. The game was actually a shadow drop during Nintendo's E3 Direct in 2018.
I remember it made for a lot of confusion, and especially when it came to Game of the Year awards, and it's like, well, what should we do with Hollow Knight? Because so many people had played it on Switch, and it's like, oh, it should be in 2018 Game of the Year consideration. Well, no, the game came out in 2017, a year stacked of video games, but remember, a lot of people had to be corrected, okay, it could be your personal, but you can't start bringing up Hollow Knight as Game of the Year 2018 overall.
And it could be Switch Game of the Year.
Sure, yes.
But yeah, it came out in 2017. It was, I agree, it should not have been up for 2018 Game of the Year, but In terms of awards, speaking of, it won PC Gamer's Award for Best Platformer in 2017, as well as Independent Game of the Year and Australian Game of the Year at the Australian Games Awards. It also won Best New IP at the National Academy of Video Game Trade Reviewers Awards, where it was also nominated for Art Direction, Character Design, and Original Action Game. And it was nominated for way more than that, including Best Debut at the Game Awards, GDC, and the BAFTAs, and Nintendo Game of the Year at the Golden Joystick Awards. Since release, Hollow Knight has released multiple free DLC and updates, including Hidden Dreams, The Grim Troop, Lifeblood, and Godmaster, and a fifth DLC was actually planned, which would have given players the ability to play as Hornet, who is a fan favorite character. This DLC is currently being reworked and is now planned to be released as a full sequel titled Hollow Knight Silksong, and I am very excited for it.
And wow, that was a game that was like, yeah, this is happening and it's coming out pretty soon.
Allegedly.
That was what, like, it was like a year and a half ago? Like, I mean, guys need to take all the time they need. Again, it's only 3 people. But I feel like the messaging could have been a little better on the expectations of when it will actually be done.
It is the only game that was part of Nintendo's booth at E3 2019 that is not out yet. The only one. Every single other one has come out by now. But, I mean, truthfully, like you said, take all the time you need. Team Cherry doesn't seem to sleep, if I had to describe it. They seem to be consistently just always working on this game, and I am ridiculously excited for Silksong. Give me time to finish the first Hollow Knight, and also time to, have time to play video games again. Thank you. So, I mentioned the composer earlier in my talking times. His name is Christopher Larkin, and let's get into him real quick. According to his website, in his early teens, he discovered improvisation on both the piano and in music software on his computer. He literally describes it as he discovered the act of improvising music on a piano. And this is what led him to getting interested in the creative process of music at age 13, especially considering that his father was a music teacher who was teaching him piano. And he also says that he used this time to start composing for his own little games in Game Maker Studio at around this same era of his life. During his senior year of high school, he began to attend the Brighton High School, where he was able to study, quote, specialist music. I don't know what that means, but it's probably different than regular music programs, I would assume. Mm-hmm. Sure. From there, after graduating, he went on to study composition at the Elder Conservatorium of Music in Adelaide, South Australia. And he says that these studies brought him into the world of classical and contemporary classical music, but he still made sure to maintain a strong connection to electronic music, progressive rock, and video game scores specifically. While at the conservatory, he connected with some filmmaking students and got his real start scoring for their film projects. He says that while he had imagined himself doing video game music for much of his schooling, he hadn't actually imagined doing film scores at all as well. And he finds it funny that instead of starting in video games, he started in film and then moved on to video games. And from there, his scores and stuff started receiving awards and nominations, and that's what eventually allowed him to break into television and video games. And a couple of questions during an interview that I was able to find with Mr. Larkin, I liked the answers to, so I want to bring them up real quick. He recommends university for upcoming musicians and says it's well worth it for aspiring composers, though he also admits that it is a huge monetary commitment that not everybody will be able to swing, and says that if you can't afford schooling, quote, the internet is becoming better and better in terms of the resources that you can get your hands on. And also, when asked if he thinks there are any misconceptions around video game music, he said, quote, "Something that gets passed around a lot is that if you don't notice the music, then the composer has done their job. I disagree with this to an extent because sometimes it's not to say the music should be really noticeable and take over the experience, but I think providing the music is reinforcing the narrative and gameplay. It can be a bit louder or more of a statement." And I would agree with that.
Too true, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think usually if it's a soundtrack, because like I have the opposite opinion. I think that a soundtrack is slightly doing its job if I don't notice it. But also, if I don't notice it, it's probably not the most exciting soundtrack in the world. So I think the opposite is usually what makes more memorable soundtracks for games such as this.
And at least like in modern times, like we've always talked about how the more retro games out there, like they kind of needed to be very melody driven and in your face and hit you there. But yeah, as games are becoming more cinematic, more diverse in what instruments can be offered, you can get ones that are scores that are like softer and blend a little bit in the background.
Mm-hmm. In terms of discography, he mostly seems to work in TV and short films, and I cannot say I have heard of any of the ones listed. He seems to have worked on a couple of children's shows, and also some just cartoon shows or something like that. One called Wastelander Panda, and another called The Adventures of Figaro Foe. Maybe those ring a bell to somebody out there, but I'm not that person.
Maybe if you live in Australia?
Maybe. Let me know. His website specifically mentions that he scored a feature documentary called Barbecue, and as far as I could tell looking into it, it appears to just be a documentary about what barbecue means in different parts of the world and the different forms that it takes between like the South in America and Japan and India and stuff like that.
Now I'm hungry.
I also am very hungry. He did the music for a game called Pac-Man 256, which I'm not familiar with. His latest project, I believe, is called WrestleDunk Sports. Again, not a game I'm familiar with, but he is also returning to score Hollow Knight Silksong. And those seem to be the only 4 games that he has really had a chance to do so far. As for historical development research for this soundtrack specifically, Larkin says that he became involved with the project around the time that it was a Kickstarter campaign, because he knew Ari Gibson from past projects and realized that while a number of other composers were pitching their work to Team Cherry at the time, because people wanted to be involved in this seemed like a cool project to be a part of, Larkin had one advantage over all of them, and that is he already lived in the same town as Team Cherry. So he was able to not just shoot them a tweet or an email, but physically go and meet with them. And so he sent his music in, and obviously he ended up on the team. Larkin was told by Team Cherry that they wanted the soundtrack to evoke a sense of melancholy and dark elegance. Quote, "The music is supposed to design the sense of the memory of what was before, something that has been lost." And in terms of inspiration, Larkin names Joe Hisaishi and his work on Studio Ghibli films, specifically the piece The Sixth Station from Spirited Away. So, you're probably wondering, hey yo, what does this game sound like? Well, let's get into the 5 critical tracks so we can find out. And our first critical track is Enter Hallownest. So this is mainly just a slightly more intense version of the main theme, and I was stuck between this and the regular main theme, which is just titled Hollow Knight. And honestly, I won't lie, I was very close to like 10 minutes before recording being like, I'm sorry, I gotta change one of my tracks. But I decided, no, I think I like this version slightly better. I think it has good energy to it. It kind of feels Elfman-esque at certain points, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's the first encounter that you'll have when listening to the soundtrack with like this sort of whiny sounding, I think it's a cello, specifically. I'm pretty sure it's a cello, but it's just this huge staple of the soundtrack as a whole. It's this very distinct sound. It's shared between, I think, a violin and other parts of the soundtrack. Here specifically, it is a cello. But yeah, it's that specific sound that makes me always think like, oh, this is Hollow Knight. I got it.
I feel like, cello is like the distinct instrument on this soundtrack. And I think you made the right call. I like this one more than the original theme. So Elfman's a good pull. I like that. That's nice.
I don't know. It was a wrestling match in my heart, and this one won out in the end. But for track number 2, we have Green Path. So for a lot of players, I feel like Green Path is probably like the second area that they're going to wander into. It was for me, at least. And while it is in ruins, like the rest of Hallownest, Green Path is actually overgrown with lush vegetation. So like all of the areas in Hollow Knight, one of the things they do really well is every area has a color associated with it, basically. So like Green Path is, as the name might suggest, green. The Forgotten Crossroads are gray. Crystal Peak is purple or pink. And just every single area, not just on the map, but just in general tone and feeling and look, all sort of have their own color palettes that really push them apart from each other. And another thing that really pushes Green Path apart from the others, I think, is while the rest of Hallownest has this very melancholy feeling to it, for obvious reasons, it's in ruins, it's fallen, Green Path, especially in terms of the music, sort of has this curiosity and this almost hope to it. Because, I mean, it is an area where, like, natural life has reclaimed the land, and it seems rather content to have done so. And I think this is where the most Ghibli influence can be heard. Because I really do think that this sounds like a Hisaishi piece through and through.
Yeah, and it's the plucking strings. Dun, 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 dun.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that really gives it that kind of hopefulness to it. Yeah, I think that's a really good description of it, and pointing out the different colors for each area helps visualize the game a little bit more.
Yeah, and it also really drives it home when you break through a wall or something, and then it's like, oh, I'm in Green Path. Everything's green.
It's new.
That's unexpected. So this is probably my favorite area song in the game. But it's not my favorite song in the game. To get that, we have to go to critical track number 3, Hornet. hands down, this is my favorite song in the game. I have been listening to this song on loop for like 2 weeks. Please send help. This is the battle music against the character Hornet, who I showed my plush off earlier. She considers herself the protector of the ruins of Hallownest, and she fights using a sewing needle on a string. She's super cool. She's my favorite character in the game, and I think I'm not alone in that opinion. And her battle music is just fantastic. It's tense, and it has this sort of air to it that not a lot of other boss songs in the game have, because Hornet is different from most of the other things that you fight in this game. She is one of the few beings that you fight that still has her sanity. She's not just some like zombie almost operating purely off of instinct. She knows exactly what she's doing, and she's one of the few warriors in Hallownest that can really like stand up to you. I think that this song really drives that home. It's got this tenseness to it. Our friend Fossils, who, shout out, helped me put together this top 5 a lot, because, again, I haven't beaten the game yet. He has described it as having this almost playful feeling to it, and I don't know if I quite get that, but it definitely does have a different tone than most of the other boss fight songs in the game.
Call me crazy. I hear this part especially with the clip, and I think of a Professor Layton puzzle battle.
I can sort of see that. I can sort of see that a little bit.
Because you're right, it's a little more whimsical. It's epic, certainly, but there isn't like the dreariness of the world involved with this piece, and I think that just gives it a little more pep to it, and there's a confrontational showdown nature to it as well.
It almost feels like Hornet is role-playing and just happens to have bumped into a real fighter, but like that can't be the case, because she actually does, like, she's one of the first skill walls, I think, that a lot of players encounter. So yeah, she knows her stuff. I cannot wait to play as her in Silksong. That game's going to be awesome. For Critical Track number 4, we're going to go into probably the most notable area in the game, the City of Tears. Within the lore, the City of Tears was once the capital of Hallownest. It is a large, open city where it always seems to be raining, which is weird, because it's underground. So that means something's leaking from somewhere, and that's probably not a good sign. But just this piece does really well at sort of simulating that rain. I think the piano part really, really does a good job at that. And it's just this gorgeous piece, and there's a vocal bit that is in the clip that doesn't actually play for a majority of your time in the City of Tears, and I couldn't figure out where it plays until recently, and I actually wasn't a big fan of it until this point where I found the context and it turned around for me super hard, where you find at a certain point you are given an item that lets you see the ghosts of some of the people that perished during the fall of Hallownest. And one of them is a lady who was a singer. She was just a singer, and people used to flock to the theater to watch her sing. Then people just sort of stopped showing up. And at some point you find her ghost, and you have the ability to just sit and listen to her sing. And you can kill her if you want. She will not put up a fight. You can strike her with the item called the Dream Needle, and she will give you 1 essence, which you need 100 to fully awaken the Dream Needle. Much like my friend Kyle, who is currently working as my guide through the game, I couldn't bring myself to kill her. Because it's such a powerful, thing to find. And other parts of this song are also fantastic. There's a cello that comes in later. And it's just, I think this is the most melancholy piece on the soundtrack by far.
Yeah, for sure. That's some gorgeous context. And I think the thing I like most about it, just from a, not much experience with the game, but just listening to the pieces, the one note that she hits where she doesn't get it perfectly. There's a little, it's not a flaw per se, but it shows that it's really a true human giving that performance. You almost feel like maybe for an indie project, especially if it's only a few people, they could cut some corners, do a vocal instrument or Vocaloid or auto-tune it. No, there's that one note that's just off with trying to bend to reach the pitch because it's going so high in her register. It's thoroughly impressive, and it really shows the genuine nature of the performance. And this is one where on Reddit today, in particular, when we're recording, on the Ask Reddit subreddit, there was a thread about which video game soundtrack is your favorite and why. And so pretty high up, someone noted Hollow Knight. And the first couple comments were City of Tears in all caps. And it's it's a pretty notable one from this one.
I got yelled at because I almost didn't put it on the Critical 5, and Fossils yelled at me, and he was correct to yell at me. And I want to admit that right now on air. He was right. I think that on the subject of it being a real human voice, I think that the most unfortunate part of this soundtrack, and this is not a dig at the soundtrack, is I think more than any other soundtrack I've ever heard, it's kind of held back by being largely MIDI. And again, that is not a dig at it. They're very high quality MIDIs. Christopher Larkin pushed them to their absolute limits. But imagine, when I say that, imagine what Larkin could do with an orchestra.
Yeah.
It would sound even better. And speaking of sounding even better, let's get to our fifth critical track, Radiance. Now, I can't speak a large amount on this one because this song plays during the true final boss of Hollow Knight with a creature known as the Radiance. And I cannot say much about it, especially the boss, because I haven't fought it. And I'm not going to go look up a video of it because I want to beat the game. I want to see it for myself. But this piece overall, though, it is intense. It is epic. It is cool. And just based on what Fossils told me when we were putting together this Critical 5, this is a song that absolutely needs to be there. And honestly, giving the whole soundtrack a listen, I think I agree. Also, this song has very Castlevania, sort of a very Castlevania feel to it.
Yeah, definitely a boss thing. Yeah, this takes it up to the next level. Amazing that it's MIDI. But yeah, wow, that's really impressive.
And that's all I can say on it. One day I'll come back with an addendum when I've beaten Hollow Knight in 2027, finally. And then Silksong will come out the next day. 4 tracks on the cutting room floor. I have 2. The first one is Mantis Lords. one day I'll beat these jerks. These super huge jerks that I'm pretty sure is an optional boss fight. This song is for an optional boss fight. Like that harpsichord and the strings put together. Oh, this song's really cool. I really like it. The Mantis Lords are this... Eventually, you drop to what I assume is the bottom of the map, but I don't know. There could be further down. And there are just these 3 Mantis warriors sitting on thrones, and you can challenge them. And I can consistently beat the first one, but then the other 2 jump out, and you have to fight 2 at the same time, and my brain just gives up. So, eventually, I will beat them.
Harpsichord is another instrument where it's like, all right, you have my attention. I don't hear you too much.
Absolutely, 100%. More harpsichords in video games, more oboes, and I guess a banjo in there too. Maybe not all at once. Those 3 don't sound like instruments that would mix great, but what do I know? And my second song on the cutting room floor is Reflection. This is actually a song that you will hear very often in Hollow Knight because it is this calm and contemplative piece that plays whenever you're near a bench. And as I mentioned before, benches are incredibly important. They reset your spawn point. They let you update the map. They let you change out your charms. They give you a full heal when you sit on them. And that means that they're very important, but also like benches, more often than not, are a safe spot to just sort of reflect on your experiences. And so for that reason, I think that this piece at least belonged on the cutting room floor and is just a piece that kind of sticks with you after a while. Yeah,
absolutely. Just, you're right. One that you're hearing a lot. It's important to the game flow overall. And it still sounds great. It sounds exactly what you'd expect it to for that bonfire-like sort of area.
Mm-hmm. So what will I never forget about Hollow Knight? I am also maybe a little too close to be able to say, I'll never forget this, because I haven't beaten it yet. I'm still working on it. But I think overall that while I have some slight issues with it, I've already mentioned my issues with the map and the boss health bars, I think that overall, Hollow Knight should be put next to Shovel Knight when it comes to the greatest crowdfunding successes in video game history. It is a fantastic game that I constantly can't wait to get back to if I ever have time again. And just the amount of content that they have shoved into this game and the amount of promises that they have fulfilled, so much so that eventually they were just like, nah, screw it. This one's a full game now. Like, just phenomenal, incredible. And the fact that it is only 3 people making these games is nuts. And I think that's the part that I will never forget at this current point is Shovel Knight, Hollow Knight, there's probably one other that I can't remember. But I think that like those 2 should be listed among the top tier of all Kickstarter games ever.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I wish I were better at this game, but I won't lie when I say like I'm eagerly curious to see what happens with Silksong and how do they follow it up and deliver, because Team Cherry has been flawless so far.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a more distinct theme tying these 2 games together this week. Did you have any like further thoughts on like, now that you've explained what Hollow Knight is? Like, I still feel like with the sword combat, like, yeah, the exploration is important, but like the dark sort of gothic sort of theming, I feel like it's much closer, especially you mentioned Castlevania in the music. Mm-hmm. It's kind of closer a little to Symphony of the Night than I feel like than to Super Metroid.
Potentially, I think the only thing that would put Ori slightly closer to Symphony is the leveling up, because there's none of that in Hollow Knight. You can upgrade your nail, and that's about it. And that costs material that is very rare and also geo. So for the most part, for Hollow Knight, like, you are stuck at the level that you are at. But otherwise, I think Hollow Knight is still closer to Super Metroid. Outside of the obvious focus on close range combat, because that is a big part. You better be good at hitting things with your sword, because otherwise you're not gonna have a great time. But I think overall, while Ori is sort of an UbiArt game meets Super Metroid, I would say that Hollow Knight is Dark Souls meets Super Metroid.
At its core, yes, I definitely agree. Anyway, it's just a theory, as the famous quote goes. Well, that will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakEasy. Joe is over at the Debaga. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, also at rhymeswithasia.com. But it's that MP3 podcast version that you want over on Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. You can find that podcast feed on podcast storefronts all around the world. Apple Podcasts, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts. And you can take that with you in your car, on a run, at work. And we won't tell your boss that you're listening to conversations about great video game soundtracks. We are also on Spotify with our podcast feed, but we also have a Spotify playlist where, if the soundtrack is available on Spotify and we've talked about certain tracks, they will be added to the more than 400 songs on the Spotify playlist. Joe, what's being added this week?
For the first time in several weeks, both of them are on Spotify.
Yay!
You've had a pretty good track record for the past couple weeks, but I'm pretty sure the past 3 or 4 episodes, I have not. It's just not on Spotify, so they're finally there.
It's because I didn't pick Nintendo games. That's the trick of it.
that's the secret.
And we're also working on bonus tracks for you. We have our top 10 lists picked, finalized for the best of 2018 and the best of 2017 when it comes to video game soundtracks. Now, we still have to flesh out what tracks we're going to play, and then all the honorable mentions. 2017 is a crazy list of video game soundtracks. There will be some editing going into that, but we are making progress, certainly. Joe, who are we talking about next week?
I will be talking about Shiho Fuji.
I will be talking about Tom Salta. It'll be a very interesting mashup of games.
One that is might be harder than last week to make a theme out of.
We'll find something, I think. All right, Joe, let's play us out.
So, obviously, I was going to go out of my way to find a remix of Hornet to be the ender for this week, and I did find one. It is an intense symphonic metal cover of Hornet by Falcone. Please enjoy that. It's super good, and I liked it a lot.
Very, very intense. Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.